My name is Zara Stone, and I'm really excited to be here today to talk to you all about my book, Killer Looks: The Forgotten History of Plastic Surgery in Prisons, as part of a Fool for the Book festival. Now, a bit of background about myself. I've spent the last decade working as a journalist, reporting on topics of beauty, culture, technology, and social justice, and often the intersection of all of these ones. I've written about prison weddings for the New York Times, plastic surgery in South Korea for the Atlantic, and female firefighters for the Washington Post. Now, a common thread that runs through all of my stories is that I'm really attracted to kind of exploring the different sides of life, and really getting into the weeds of how the concept of how we look influences the privileges and opportunities we have in life and how we coexist with other people. And that's really what made the history of prison plastic surgery so fascinating to me. It was this huge enterprise where 500,000 people across America, the UK, and Canada had free facelifts, nose jobs, scar removal, and all other kinds of surgeries over a period of around 70 years. But there was very little documentation, and it felt really important that such a piece of history really be captured. And as I looked into this, and I found out one of the pivotal pieces of this plastic surgery project took place on Rikers Island, a notoriously terrible place with a horrific violence rate, among other things, I really kind of had an idea of how I would begin this story. So what we're going to do is I'm going to start in 1909 when Michael Lewin was born in Poland. Michael's father was in the lumber industry, and his mother was a homemaker who liked to take him to the opera. Michael was, a pretty average kid. He liked art, he liked history, and he decided he wanted to go into medicine because he really liked the idea that he could use his skills to help people. Problem was, his family was Jewish and Poland was heavily anti-Semitic at the time, and he wasn't allowed to study. So he went to Switzerland for university instead. And he thought he would return when he graduated in 1933, but due to, even more kind of violence and racial tension, his parents advised him, to go somewhere else, somewhere safer. And so he opted for New York City, where he had an uncle. And he never saw his parents again. Now, New York City was dazzling to 25-year-old Dr. Michael Lewin. The skyscrapers, the yellow cabs, just the hustle and bustle of it all. But he felt pretty shabby, poor. He wasn't very, he didn't really speak particularly well. He still had broken English, and it was pretty difficult to get along. His uncle, who was a New York City plastic surgeon, helped him get a residency at a local hospital. It wasn't paid, but they did give him meals, which was enough to subsist on. And he spent his evenings going to English classes with other immigrants. Over the year, as his career flourished, resulting in him ending up the chief of plastic surgery at Montefiore Medical Center, a really large hospital in the Bronx, he really never forget about his earlier times and how people treated him when he was a nobody. And this became a central theme of his career and really influenced how he wanted to help people. So he really had this instinctive knowledge that many of us can't quite articulate about how people treat us based on our appearance. In 1953, Michael started going to Sing Sing prison, where he offered free plastic surgery to people who were incarcerated there. He'd been there for a visit and had just kind of seen how many scars and lacerations the population had. And prison is famously very hard on the body, and he really wanted to give back. Over the years, he kind of believed that the people he operated on didn't seem to return to the prison. So the recidivism then, as it is now, was something around 76%, with 1 in 5 people returning to prison within 5 years. But it did seem, in his opinion, the people who had plastic surgery simply were not. But he was also very aware this was anecdotal, and he wanted scientific evidence. So he went to the warden and asked if he could do a study. He said no, but then he had better luck with New York City's corrections commissioner, who suggested Rikers Island would be a really good place to connect with people. Michael Lewin wasn't the first person to perform plastic surgery in prisons. This had been going on for some half a century already, much of this falling under the eugenics umbrella, the now very debunked theory about how a person looks says something about their character. This wasn't even the first study of what plastic surgery had on a prison population. A couple in 1949, a Chicago plastic surgeon published a study reporting on 10 years of operating on some almost 700 people. And he'd found that out of those who were released, only 1.7% recidivated. And so this was very interesting and very hopeful, but at the same time, this was a retroactive paper. Dr. Michael Lewin, he really wanted the rigor and the scientific nous that came with following the correct protocols. So he worked with a team of psychologists and sociologists and corrections officer, and their project they named the Surgical and Social Restoration of Adult Offenders, and they then designed the study. So it had a couple of components. People were going to be divided into 4 different groups: a control group, a plastic surgery group, a group that received extra social and welfare services, and a group that received plastic surgery and extra social and welfare services. They would be followed up with at 1 month, 3 months, 6 months, and a year. And they would be tracked for their employment records, their criminal records, and all of the myriad of different things to get a lot of data points. They were funded by the federal government, the Department of Health and Welfare, a $260,000 grant, which was, around $2.7 million in today's money. It was completely voluntary to enter the study, with the prisoners informed via info sessions and flyers that this was taking place. Everyone who was interested had to pass a physical and psychological screen. That was very important. Once released, they would have the surgery and they would be followed while they weren't in prison. Rikers Island being a jail, not a prison. And so they were very concerned to see if people would actually be interested. And so they opened the first, box to try and see how many people had applied. 1,424 people applied on the first round. And now, over the course of the study, which ran a couple of years, starting in 1963, there were a bunch of different problems. First, there were a bunch of correction officers who really wouldn't get with the program and resented the psychologists and sociologists coming into the prison. And so they would bring people to the wrong rooms, they wouldn't turn up at all, and that was heavily disruptive. Then there were the people themselves. One of the most famous stories being a man who he had a facelift and a nose job when he left prison, and he fell in love with the nurse in his recovery room, and then they ran off together and got married. So a nice story, but because they ran off, they never got the data from that, so it couldn't be included in the final tally. So this study attracted national attention. The theory that thieves are hulking brutes with monkey brows and stick-out ears died half a century ago, commented one reporter from the Herald Journal. Scar removal found to reduce repeaters among ex-cons, commented the New York Times. By 1968, all the data was in and compiled and was announced at the world's first Correctional Plastic Surgery Conference. Michael Lewin took to the stage to reveal them. In this day and age, plastic surgeons must learn to cooperate with behavioral scientists, he said, telling people the causes of antisocial behavior were multiple and interrelated. The physical aspect is obviously only one part. So then, the data. Subjects that received plastic surgery had a recidivism rate of 32%, compared to 68% for the non-plastic surgery groups. Additionally, out of the group that was released, they found that around 20% of those who had plastic surgery reported a significant increase in how much they were paid by their new employers. Something which really, in a way, remains true today. Pretty privilege is often talked about. People who are considered more attractive earn around $230,000 over the course of their lifetime, and they're more likely to be promoted, more likely to be given more leeway in school with grades. It's really the whole trifecta of privilege and advantage. So the conference was a resounding success. Post-conference issues for guidelines in prison plastic surgery were distributed nationwide, and by the 1980s, there were prison plastic surgery programs in some 42 states and a number of federal prisons. But questions still remained, really deep, troubling questions. Could people who were incarcerated truly consent to such a coercive situation, to surgery under such coercive manner? And then again, what were the ethics of operating on them? And finally, we had the idea that, and this was kind of heavy with the public, like, was it fair for people who had committed crimes to receive this kind of beauty advantage that law-abiding people couldn't access? Thank you all for listening. These questions and others will be answered in the book, as well as going into some of the prison plastic surgery on different population segments, such as juvenile delinquents and, female prisons, which were their whole own pot of troubles. To wrap up, I'm Zara Stone. I'm the author of Killer Looks, The Forgotten History of Plastic Surgery in Prisons, and you can click here if you would like to buy the book, and follow me on socials. I'm at Almost Zara on Twitter, at Almost Zara on Instagram, and at Prison Plastic Surgery on Instagram. Have a great day.